Are you ready for some baseball? Officially, the 2025 Major League Baseball season truly gets started today. Our first spring training game, a standalone matchup between the Dodgers and the Cubs. Both teams reporting early to spring training because they will open up the regular season ahead of the true opening day in Tokyo against one another on March 18th. Of course, last year it was the Dodgers and the Padres in the Seoul Series to start the year in Seoul, South Korea. This year to Japan makes a ton of sense, of course, for Los Angeles from a branding perspective. Shohei Ohtani, Yoshi Yamamoto, and now Roki Sasaki all play in that Dodger blue. DRS, we'll talk the spring training game in just a bit, but it does allow us a moment to project the future for both of these teams throughout 2025. And, of course, the rich just kept getting richer this winter. The Dodgers basically signing everybody back that they needed to. Added Blake Snell, Roki Sasaki, great reliever in Tanner Scott. Blake Trinan returns as well. So much talent on this Dodgers team. It almost doesn't seem fair. It's like it broke baseball. But how do the Dodgers continue with the success of winning a World Series year over year? Here is the outlook for LA. Win total, 104.5. To make the postseason, you can see the number. To win the National League West for a 12th time in the last 13 years is minus 650. To win the National League pennant, basically before opening day, the Dodgers are nearing even money at plus 140. And, of course, a ridiculously short number to win a World Series once again at plus 240. Donnie, how do you look at the Dodgers entering 2025?
As an absolute powerhouse, and they should win the World Series. Now, granted, we've seen great baseball teams not win the World Series. It's what happens. There's attrition. But understand this, too. The Dodgers always have an advantage as well. They went out, spent crazy, brought wonderful talent into the building, great bullpen, great starting lineup, great frontline pitching staff. And then understand this. Once you get to the trade deadline, the Dodgers have unbelievable prospects and unbelievable amounts of money, so they can add 2 more starting pitchers and another MVP caliber bat should they choose to do so. So take a look at this. Midway through the season, Vladimir Guerrero doesn't look like he's going to sign back with Toronto. They're not having a great season. Hey, we got 2 prospects for you. Vladdy, come on over. We'll sign you to a deferred contract for 15 years, and you'll be part of the Dodger community. But to understand this for me, like, I don't hate what the Dodgers are doing. They're playing, and they're doing everything in constraints of what the salary cap allows, which there is none in Major League Baseball, and also using deferred money, which they don't have any, constraints on that either. But in the next 2 to 3 years, this might actually correct baseball because some of the teams might force a lockout, which is great. But based on this season here, the Dodgers doing everything they can for their fan base to say, you live in a city where it's crazy overpriced. You want to go to Dodgers games. It takes you 6 hours to get in the ballpark. The seats are expensive. The beer's expensive. The drinks are expensive. So we better put on a show in the field. And they're doing that for their clientele.
It's why you go to the top of the park. You take in the views of downtown Los Angeles, and you get yourself a Tecate for a much cheaper price than what you will see elsewhere throughout the stadium. Like Estrella Jalisco, no, Tecate is better. Maybe make it a Michelada. You're having a lot of fun at Dodger Stadium. Now, 104 and a hook, DRS, is an absurd win total. Last year, if you remember, the Dodgers ended up on the mountaintop of MLB. They reached the pinnacle we expected entering the season for this Dodgers team. But they only won 98 regular season games. It was the first time in a very long time that nobody around the bigs got to the century mark throughout the regular season. Baseball, it feels, is a random sport, right? The best team that had all the resources at the end of the year won a World Series against perhaps the second best team that has the second most resources in all the sport in the New York Yankees, as we probably all anticipated, and was the shortest number entering 2024. But, Donnie, there is an idea that because baseball is so random, that each and every night, even with a loaded roster and a great starting staff, that through a long season that is a marathon of 162 games and a tenuous October run, that you can pick off even the best. We'll get to the World Series odds in just a moment, but that would be the only real thing standing in the way of the Dodgers, right? The idea of the randomness of baseball night in, night out, because on paper and from the odds outlook, the Dodgers should win a World Series even right now.
Yes, and the question is going to be like, you look at that total of 104.5 and you say, boy, that seems high. Now, there is a 162-game schedule that you're going to play, but at the same time, how many times are the Dodgers actually going to be underdogs against any team in Major League Baseball? Sure, when they go on the road, and let's just say Zach Wheeler's pitching for the Philadelphia Phillies in, let's just say, Philadelphia, and you're going with your fourth starter in that game. Slight underdogs at that point, which is crazy. But you're talking about when you're just playing the odds and the percentages to say, let's just say the Dodgers, honestly, Ben, 145 times they're going to be favorites out of 162 games probably makes a lot of sense, maybe even more than that. So honestly, if they're the favorites every night they're supposed to win, you're supposed to put up big numbers. And the one thing that can rescue is like, hey, they got a great starting lineup for this. They can afford literally all 1 through 9 to get injured and be like, hey, we're still fine with our B team out here. As stupid as that sounds, it's correct. That's how deep they are. Like, they're going to have to force pitchers that are going to get angry because they're going to be on extended DL stints when they're not even injured because they just can't fit it in the top 5 in the rotation there. That's what the Dodgers' problem is going to be, is how do I make sure everybody's happy on this team, because everybody is good enough to play.
That was one of the issues for the Dodgers, at least entering the postseason. A really banged-up starting staff. Shohei Ohtani, of course, was not pitching last year. Tyler Glasnow, who was the ace the entirety of the year for L.A., did not pitch in the postseason. But to Donnie's point, the Dodgers recognized that at the All-Star or the trade deadline, went out and got Jack Flaherty, who started Game 1 of the World Series, and now Flaherty is back in Detroit. Yes, an abundance of riches, an overwhelming amount of wealth for this Dodgers team, and we expect them to realize even that very optimistic odds perspective entering the 2025 Major League Baseball campaign. By the way, 98-64 last year, the 4 full years prior, at least 100 wins for the Dodgers. They have won the NL West 11 of the last 12 years. So yes, we believe they will be in a position to contend once again at bare minimum. But winning a division and reaching the postseason, of course, is not the expectation in the City of Angels. Might it be, though, at Wrigley? We'll talk the Cubbies on the other side of the break in the 2025 MLB campaign outlook in Chicago on the north side. And look at those World Series odds up next on the early line. The official debut of a spring training game in Major League Baseball. Today, between the Dodgers and the Cubs, who will open up the season even before the true opening day against one another in Japan, starting March 18th, just under a month away. So we talked about the Dodgers, of course, the very short World Series favorites. We'll look at those odds in just a moment. But quickly, a focus on the north side of Chicago and the Cubs. Optimistic DRS entering 2025 to be a playoff team come October. Minus 172, minus 105 in the National League Central, and a win total of 86.5. Of course, the biggest offseason acquisition for the Cubbies, a trade with the Astros to get the outstanding outfielder and power bat Kyle Tucker. But the last time the Cubs went over this win total of 86.5 was way back in 2018. Of course, that capped off that historic 4-year run for the Cubs that included the 2016 World Series, snapping the curse of the Billy Goat. How do you look at the Cubbies entering 2025?
As trying to make money, which is similar to what they always try to do and tell you that they're poor and they can't afford a lot of players. They do have a decent lineup coming into it. The reason I say this, though, it's very rare that there's an instance where Chicago is a monster market. Do you know, see how they operate? And it's a shame that their actual ownership does this. The Brewers, small market. Cardinals, small market. Reds, small market. Pirates, small market. And then there's the Cubs. Yeah. They should absolutely be the Mets of that division and outspend everybody and win every single season. But their ownership group that brought in is going to say, you know what? We're just going to sit back and pile up the money and tell you that we're out of expenditures. But I am optimistic for the season, because if you're looking at the estimated go-to starting lineup this year, Happ, Tucker, Suzuki, Bush, Swanson, Horner, Crow, Armstrong, Shaw, and Amaya, it's not that bad here. You take a look at the starting pitchers that you expect there. Imanaga's a very good pitcher. Steele's very good. Yeah. Jamison Tyone, veteran. Matthew Boyd trying to get that reclamation project left-handed pitcher to try to step up, but not expected to be a top 3 guy. And then Javier Assad. It's not a bad lineup all the way through. So if you are looking, yes, the Brewers typically have that very good team. Don't spend money. We don't know how they win. I have optimistic, thoughts about the Cubs this year winning it, because why? Who knows what the Cardinals are doing? Still looking to piecemeal and get rid of Nolan Arenado at that point. Some of those aging veterans. The Reds, they're young and exciting, but not really spending enough money on the top end of the rotation to get through. The Pirates are always the Pirates. So the Cubs probably should win this division. And if you look at the NL Central at minus 105, I think it's a pretty fair price.
DRS, you look at the Redbirds. St. Louis was the favorite to win this division entering last year. Now a 10-1 price, tied for the longest alongside the Pittsburgh Pirates, company you do not want to hold entering a season. The Brewers have won the NL Central 3 of the last 4 years and yet have that second best number at plus 290. Minus 105, the price for Chicago. They are the favorites. The Brewers won it last year in a season in which Craig Counsell left Milwaukee to go to the divisional foe to join the Cubs, and Pat Murphy won National League Manager of the Year. The Reds, an interesting team there in the mix as well. Could be on the rise, one of the bright stars in baseball in Ellie De La Cruz. Donnie, we were talking about the Dodgers. Again, opening game of spring training is today. Yoshi Yamamoto starting for the Dodgers. They're a minus 192 favorite against Cody Poteet on the other side. For Chicago, they're a slight underdog. Both of these guys, DRS, probably going to go for an inning at most, and then we'll get into the reserves. There is a money line for the spring training debut this year in MLB. Nothing else outside of that. We'll continue to talk World Series prices, factor in the pennant prices as well on the other side of the break. But I want everybody to look at the World Series odds. Plus 240 is the price on the Los Angeles Dodgers before we even get underway this year. The Yankees, unsurprisingly, second best number at 7-1. But, Donnie, the Dodgers are nearly a third of the number of everybody else around Major League Baseball, just from a handicapping odds perspective, let alone outlook, talent, roster, manager, outside of that. Is the number just far too short on the Dodgers ahead of a season that is 162 games long?
No, because if you're the betting public and you're a sports book, you're saying, well, where is 98% of our bets coming in if it was plus 100 to win the World Series? It would be on the Dodgers. The other 2% just betting on their favorite teams here. And as I said many times before, this isn't a team where the ownership group goes, hey, look, guys, it's up to you now to win it. Like, no, they might get an MVP at the trade deadline to bolster the team once again because money doesn't matter in Los Angeles. They'll continue to stack great players. This team that you see on opening day, probably going to be better by the trade deadline. Make it make sense.
I don't even know what the starting staff is going to look like. Tyler Glasnow, Blake Snell, who was great last year after a sluggish start in San Francisco, won the Cy Young Award the year before that. Is Shohei even pitching? Do we know? More on the early line up next. With the opening day of spring training starting this afternoon between the Dodgers and the Cubs, we get you ready with an early preview of the 2025 Major League Baseball season. Donnie, right before the break, we showed you those World Series odds. The Dodgers nearly a third of everybody else around the bigs. We'll talk American League in just a second. But, of course, this winter, it wasn't just the Dodgers adding everybody. The biggest move that we saw, the addition of Juan Soto for the New York Mets. And yet the Amazons still the third best price alongside the Philadelphia Phillies to win the National League at plus 650. Both teams behind the Atlanta Braves at a 5-1 number. So DRS, very short number for the Dodgers to win the NL as it is to win the World Series. Of the other teams around the National League, especially those top 4 teams in the pennant odds, who do you think provides LA the toughest test this season?
Probably going to be the Philadelphia Phillies if they stay hot at the right time at the end of the season, which you saw them flame out against the New York Mets. But they have the most talent-wise, let's just say 1 through 9, a pitching staff and bullpen if we combine it. Now, the Mets are going to be good. The Mets already knocked the Phillies out last year, and their estimated starting lineup with Lindor, Soto, Alonso, Nimmo, Vientos, that's a really good 1 through 5 just to get started here. But the pitching staff here, always going to be questions. Senga, yes, good pitcher. Has he shown up in the biggest moments? Maybe not necessarily here. You take a look at Minaya, who's a very good pitcher. Peterson, okay. Clay Holmes, Paul Blackburn, Griffin Canning. See where we're going here? When you look at the Philadelphia Phillies, their 1 through 5 is pretty strong. And that's usually what you're going to base the season off of. Because on any given day, your pitcher is probably better than the other pitcher. And you're not saying, okay, once we get through our 1-2, it's a crapshoot 3, 4, and 5. That's not the case. I expect better things last year, regular season-wise, than even what the Mets had last year. Pete Alonso comes back, expectations higher. You get Juan Soto, who'll protect a couple guys in that lineup. lineup. We understand that. The Braves would be okay as well. I didn't think they had a great offseason. You're still waiting to see what we're going to get out of Strider for this season, as well as Ronald Acuna. But for me, in the National League, you look at the price points here, they do make sense. But I do think the Phillies at plus 650, the Mets 650, about right there. The Braves at 5-1, I probably would slide them down a little bit lower at this point. But you will get a pretty good punch out of that NL East there with the Braves, Mets, and the Phillies.
It is really interesting to me that the Braves are in front of the Mets and the Phils, both with the optimism for Philadelphia and the proven track record. Of course, the Mets got the better of the Phils in the DS this year, made it to the National League Championship Series against the Dodgers, and then added Juan Soto. But, Donnie, I think you're correct. The pitching advantage right now is with Philadelphia, maybe even in front of the Atlanta Braves. Max Fried departs. He's now in the Bronx, pitching for the Yankees. Chris Sale, coming back the way he did last year, was sensational to win that National League Cy Young Award, and you would expect the preseason favorite from last year to win the NL Cy Young Award in Spencer Strider, now back and healthy. That will be huge. Also with the reigning National League MVP and Ronald Acuna Jr. coming back as well. The Braves last year, the story for Atlanta DRS was just how injured they were the entirety of the season. But this is still a Braves team that has reached the postseason 7 consecutive years, expected to do the same this season as well. And I think you described it well there. Who has the highest ceiling in terms of cashing that National League pennant price? I think we would expect all 3 of those teams out of the NL East to be in the postseason. In the expanded playoffs now, of course, around Major League Baseball are 3 division winners. Those 3 wild card teams, the opportunity to have 3 of the 5 teams out of the NL East there does seem fitting. Donnie, anybody outside of the top 4, Dodgers, Braves, Phils, Mets, that you think could actually challenge or contend for a National League pennant?
I mean, you probably would start to slide down to the San Diego Padres just because you take a look at the lineup, and it is pretty impressive. Arise there in that leadoff spot, Tatis, Merrill, Machado, Cronenworth, Bogarts. Like, they have the firepower to tangle. But the only problem is it's like, okay, well, you're going to be bumping heads there with the Dodgers for the majority of the season being in the division, and also their pitching staff. It is decent there. Dylan Cease, very good pitcher. Michael King, young and up-and-comer that they got in that initial trade with the New York Yankees to bring him over. Yu Darvish, but again, running a little bit long at this point, an aging veteran. So if there's one team outside that you just would say had the pedigree and maybe the payroll to try to compete, it would be the Padres. You look at the Diamondbacks, they're okay. The Cubs, we just reviewed them all right. Brewers, the same thing. The Reds, some young talent on there can catch lightning in a bottle. Then the Giants, we'll see what they do. But it just feels like that top 4 is going to run away with things here. And also, the Dodgers are going to win that division, which means the Padres are going to be that wild card team, and on the road, that always hurts because the Phillies, the Mets, and the Braves probably going to tangle for that top spot. And whoever gets that will have an advantage. But once again, the Dodgers world, we're just living in it, and that includes the Padres out on the West Coast. Do you remember when the Padres started spending all that money, and then the Dodgers like, okay, let's just ramp it up and 5-fold your salary cap at this point, or your whatever you're paying for your team? It's crazy what the Dodgers have turned into, that juggernaut, but that price is reflective here. It is a long season, but having more good players than anybody else, that's great for a long season. It's not a sprint, which would help some other teams. The longness of the season actually helps the Dodgers.
DRS, when you look at the odds to make the postseason out of the National League, as we showed you, the Dodgers are minus 10,000. That takes into account their minus 650 to win the National League West. The Mets and the Braves both minus 325. The Phils at minus 300. The Cubbies are the minus money favorites to win the National League Central. They're minus 172. The D-backs and the Padres are slightly in minus money, if you want to count it as such. Arizona minus 110, San Diego minus 106. But it feels like outside of the top 4, in the Cubs, the favorites to win the National League Central, you're really looking for some wild card spots at best, unless something crazy happens in the NL West. And not just because of how great this Dodgers team looks, starting staff, lineup, up and down, 1 through 9, but also their history. They have won the division in the NL West 11 of the last 12 years. Donnie, speaking of the Dodgers, very short price, but honestly, almost shorter in comparison to win the World Series at plus 240 than they are to win the National League pennant at plus 140. Baseball is a long season. You can get off the slow starts in regular season games in late March, in early April, and in early May. But assuming the Dodgers, who will probably be booked as a favorite in 95% of their games this year, just make good on a couple of those money line prices and start off in a good way, DRS, how quickly do you expect LA to flip to a minus money favorite to win the National League pennant?
Well, it's probably going to take some doing. Like if they just get out to a red hot start, 21-3, which again, I don't expect them to be that. That would be even for a great team. It's like, hey, winning 2 out of every 3 games is really good for them to actually double that basically. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but sometime around mid-May to June, when if they have a 10-game lead already in the division, then you're going to start to see some of those things flip over. But also understand this. Handicappers are also shrewd and smart with their money. Hey, I can't wait to bet the Dodgers plus 140 to win the pennant. You're going to tap a plus 140 price for 8.5 months, it feels like right now, just to get that back. Like you tie up money for 12s and 15 to 1s and 50 to 1s, not for plus 140. So you can do better with your money. Even if you predict right now, hey, man, Dodgers going to win it all. At plus 140, tying up for that long, it doesn't sound like a great investment overall to me.
No, it certainly doesn't, right? But it does also make some sense. Plus 140 could be relative value by the time we get to the end of May, right? Certainly by the time we reach September and October, if the Dodgers do exactly what we all expect them to do with a little bit of wiggle room as well. I'll just say this. If the Dodgers win the National League West, even if they don't have the best record come the National League postseason in the NL, they're going to be a minus money favorite to win the pennant. Even, I was just thinking to myself, even if they get to the playoffs, some weird way or another, they're a wild card team, you would still almost think the Dodgers might be minus money or even money to win the pennant. For a lot of last year, after Philadelphia got off to a record-setting start, the Phils were the favorites, starting to be that 1 seed before they tailed off after the All-Star break, and the Dodgers rallied to be that number 1 seed. How impactful is home field advantage going to be? By the time we get to the postseason, we shall see. All right, enough of the Dodgers in the National League. Let's talk AL pennant prices. Can the Yankees win a pennant once again? Don't forget, last year, their first pennant since 2009. They will be expected to do so, but who are their biggest challengers in the AL? We'll discuss up next on the Early Line. Over to the American League, where the second best price to win a World Series this year was last year's runner-up. That would be the New York Yankees. But the Yanks, in comparison to everybody else around the American League, a very favorable number. Half the price of every other AL team to win a World Series, 7-1 for the Yanks, and more than half the price to win the American League pennant as well. Plus 280 on the Bronx Bombers. The Orioles, their divisional mates, at a 6-1 number. The Astros, a plus 850 price, and then a slew of teams, DRS. The Red Sox, Rangers, and M's, all at a 10-1 number. Let's start with the gap between those top 2 teams, which was really the story of the 2024 MLB campaign. How tightly contested will the pennant race be from the odds perspective between the Yanks and the O's? Is nearly a $3 then some gap justified between the Pinstripes and the Orioles?
Yeah, I don't know if it is. Now, on the outset, are the Yankees a very talented team? Yes, they are. Did they lose Juan Soto but spend some money, make some trades that were very shrewd? Yes, they did. I'm not worried about the pitching staff because let's start there. Looking at the starting lineup on day number 1, Garrett Cole, Max Fried, Carlos Rondon. Obviously, you have Luis Gil and Clark Schmidt in that lineup, which, again, Cole may be the best pitcher overall in the American League. Max Fried comes over as that left-handed pitcher that you needed here to stabilize that lineup. He comes over from the Atlanta Braves. You pay him good money. And then Carlos Rondon, you're still hoping that he can actually come back and be the quality pitcher that you signed him big money for. But you know what I'm worried about here? Not the bullpen. Devin Williams coming over, unbelievable closer. You'll be fine there. It is the lineup. Because Juan Soto's out there, which did a great job of protecting Aaron Judge. That's not going to be there. So their projected opening day lineup, Jason Dominguez in the leadoff spot, leaves a lot to be desired there. They've been waiting on this kid for a couple years. Maybe it turns into be a good one. Cody Bellinger certainly has had his ups and downs over the past couple years. Giancarlo Stanton, who's already telling you right now, Ben, I can't even swing it back because my elbow is already jacked up. Then Jazz Chisholm, up and down, Paul Goldschmidt. Maybe get something out of the aging veteran there, Wells, Volpe, and Cabrera. So when I look at the Yankees in that bandbox ballpark, which is so easy to hit home runs, do we get that offensive surge that we're going to need? But the one thing you can lean on is that pitching staff should be good to go from day number 1, and that's why they're favorites here.
Half of those 6 best prices, DRS, to win the American League pennant from the American League East. The Yankees, the O's, and, of course, the Red Sox. So let's talk about the other divisions here as well. From the American League West, you still have the Astros. Obviously, a couple of changing faces. Kyle Tucker now in Chicago. Alex Bregman now a member of the Red Sox. It seems like that dynastic run is starting to fade in H-Town, and yet still that third best price. Last year, a disastrous start for the Stros, where our joke here was, do we need to hide the fork? Do we need to get the fork out? Do we need to put the fork in Houston? But you see the Rangers and the Mariners, both at a 10-1 price. 2 years ago, who was your World Series champ? That would be the Texas Rangers. So, Donnie, the highest outlook, highest ceiling, best pennant bet in the American League from the AL West division is which team?
Yeah, it's funny. Look at that, too, because you are looking at the Rangers and saying, like, do they have a pedigree? Yes, they do. And it's a fun lineup if it's healthy. Simeon, Seager, Langford, Peterson, Garcia, Jung, Carter, Berger, Heim. Like, they can really do some damage. But you're also hoping on the back end of the rotation. Let's just say you can luck into some things. Nathan Eovaldi, quality pitcher, good starter. He'll be okay for them. Jacob deGrom is on that roster. You say, man, could he just possibly stay healthy? And I'm not talking about let's go back 5 or 6 years with the New York Mets when he was absolutely filthy dominant. But can he be a top 3 starter in your rotation? John Gray can do some jobs. Molly's there. Bradford. They do have some options here where you can catch lightning in a bottle. The one team I just can't seem to trust, though, on a year-to-year basis is the Mariners here, to be honest. So for me, out west, I look more towards, obviously, Texas. You look at the Mariners, like they do have pieces to the puzzle, but isn't it always like, hey, this young, really good pitching staff finally going to take a stand and be dominant, and now we can't be as dominant because we have to win games 2-1. You get the drift on that. So for me, I probably would buy a bounce back on Texas here more than I would, let's just say, the Seattle Mariners.
In those three teams, very tightly compact atop the AL West odds, the Astros a slight favorite at plus 170, but both the Rangers and the Mariners at a 2-1 number. All three teams just apart by about 30 cents. How about the other two teams in the division? The Angels, Mike Trout, maybe a right fielder. Anthony Rendon, does he still play baseball? The answer to the first question is yes. The answer to the second question is no. How about that team? Do they play in Oakland? No longer the Oakland Athletics, not even the Sacramento Athletics. Certainly don't call them the Las Vegas A's yet. They're just the Athletics this year at a 25-1 number. I hope they are resilient and win some games. DRS, your least favorite division in baseball, the American League Central. The shortest price out of the Central to win a pennant, that would be the Tigers and the Twins, both at an 11-1 price. The Guardians, 14-1. And the Royals, all at a 15-1 number. Young, competitive teams and rosters, but no clear-cut frontrunner. Who do you think is your favorite bet to win the pennant out of the American League Central?
It's so hard. And you're just looking at the price points there. Probably makes some sense there just to take the Tigers. But it feels like that's one of those divisions. You just put every team into a hat, shake it loose. Like, oh, look at that. The Guardians going to have a good season this year. Or the Twins are actually going to bounce back and not collapse in the second half of the season. But if you are just looking at front and start pitching, Flaherty does go back to Detroit along with Skubal, one of the best pitchers, if not the best, in the American League. Olsen, Mize, and Job. So they do have some pitchers that they can lean on. And the lineup is pretty versatile. You know, if you can get Gleyber Torres here coming over as a free agent from the New York Yankees, Riley Green, Kerry Carpenter, Matt Vierling, not household names, but I'll tell you this right now. You want to follow me throughout the summer betting, and a lot of those, run props that you like or hitting props, they come from Detroit because they got some pretty good numbers. They're going to have to score runs, and those guys are going to have to lead them there. So not household names that could be big contributors this year. The Detroit Tigers in that lineup for sure.
We expect Shane Bieber to be back for the Guardians as well, a former American League Cy Young winner. In terms of the AL Central prices, just $1 separates everybody. Minnesota in front, the Tigers, Guardians, and Royals. Minnesota plus 310, Detroit plus 250, Cleveland plus 290, and my team last year, KC, at plus 310. I would also like to note, DRS, make sure you pay attention to the win totals for those teams in the American League Central. Yeah, they got to play everybody in that division, should be competitive to get a ton of wins, but everybody plays the White Sox 19 times. That's going to be a benefit for those win totals that will all hover to the low to mid 80s. Just something to note. We'll continue to talk Major League Baseball on the other side of the break. Up next here on TEF. We continue to get you ready for the 2025 Major League Baseball season. Today is the opening day of spring training between the Dodgers and the Cubs. A standalone spring training game. Ton of standalone games as of
Yeah.
late. A ton of fun to break down and get you ready for. DRS, the top two teams to win the American League pennant, both hail from the same division, the AL East. The Yankees in front, the Orioles far behind in the pennant prices, but maybe not so much in the divisional numbers. The Boston Red Sox, also one of those 6 teams around the American League, favored to see the postseason and with a 10-1 price or better to win that pennant. Here are the American League East odds. The Yankees even money at plus 100. The O's plus 250 and the Red Sox plus 440. But let's start with the team that sits with the longest price right now, who finished dead last, 5th out of 5 teams in the American League East a year ago. That would be the Blue Jays, who, of course, have been a talk of baseball the last few days with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Unable to reach that long-term contract extension. Vladdy setting the deadline for Monday night. Unable to reach that big new deal. Will not negotiate through the season. A contract year and more than likely a free agent at the end of this campaign. What will the impact of Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s contract situation in Toronto mean for the rest of the American League East and maybe the rest of the AL as a whole?
Normally, you would say nothing, but the fact that you just see the odds there up on that marker, well, they're dead last in the AL East, which means the expectations are they're going to finish last in the actual division, which then means around the trade deadline, well, if we're last and Vladdy's not going to want to come back, then we move and shift him here. So maybe a balance of power. I doubt they trade him in the division, which they probably goes out to the other league, and we laugh about it might be the Dodgers. But looking at the Blue Jays, the lineup, Springer, Vladdy, Santander was a decent signing there to give him a little bit of a power bat in that lineup, Bo Bichette, but that's not a good-looking lineup. Then you look at the pitching staff, aging veterans, Kevin Gausman, Jose Barrios at this point, Bassett, and Scherzer. I mean, what's the guy going to give you? 1 or 2 innings every week, it seems like, before he breaks down? So I do think it's right. When you look at the AL East, and by the way, if Toronto was in one of the central divisions, yeah, they probably could compete, but they're not. They're in a big money division with a lot of really good baseball teams, and somebody has to come in last place. And you look at the rosters, it's probably Toronto, Ben.
Yeah, I would think so, DRS. The Toronto Blue Jays, the last few years, even entering 2024, which was not a great season, of course, up in the 6th, they have had the odds optimism to be that playoff team, to be that wild card contender, maybe to challenge for the top spot in the division. Hasn't actually been realized. The O's, certainly a young and promising team that DRS the last few years have taken their lumps, of course, in the postseason. Will Baltimore be able to realize that this time around? What's your outlook for the Orioles this year after losing Corbin Burns in the offseason?
They just don't have enough pitching. Like, isn't that what it comes down to? Like, you look at the staff, we just explained to you how good the Yankees were in both the bullpen and their frontline pitching. They'll get some hitting. Now, granted, I like that lineup 1 through 9. It's fun. You'll be able to bet them. Camden Yards, the move of the fences back in a little bit in left field, so maybe more home runs there that you could take a look at as opposed to that travesty that they tried to pass off as helping their pitching staff and ruining one of the crown jewel ballparks in America. Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Charlie Morton, Dean Kramer. Stop the madness, Baltimore. You better be beating a lot of teams 10-9 this year.
91-71, the record for the O's last year. They trailed by 3 games in the American League East. The Yankees took the top spot in the league and, of course, in the division. The Guardians were 92-69, had a 6.5 game advantage for the American League Central. The Tigers made some noise in the postseason. The Royals tried, but came up short. All things to keep an eye on. DRS elsewhere around the American League East. How you feeling about the Red Sox? We've talked about the drama this week. Ralphie Devers at third base. Alex Bregman, the big priced and new acquisition. And yet all of Devers' boys coming to his defense to stay at the hot corner. Is the drama too much to have you buy into Boston?
It's not, because you also look at the closing situation, the bullpen, the back end guys, Liam Hendricks and Aroldis Chapman, a couple flamethrowers back there, but you always want to look at that starting lineup. And again, we talk about Rafael Devers, you know him. Alex Bregman, you know him. There's a lot of really good bats around him. Duran in the starting spot, Cassis, Yoshida, Story, Abreu. Like, there's some nice pieces to the puzzle. Then when you get to the starting staff, how about the acquisition? You're getting in Garrett Crochet, sort of that left-hander to be the top of the rotation guy. Houck, Bello had a solid season. Walker Buehler now on a different roster. Maybe he can fit in and settle in as that 3 or 4 Giolito, Cutter Crawford. There is depth there for the Boston Red Sox. For me, I actually like the Red Sox more than the Orioles, to be honest.
Yeah, I think Boston presents some value, DRS. Great pitching staff. Garrett Crochet, One of the best last year in the American League. We'll see if he continues that. Now a Red Sox and not a White Sox any longer. Hour number 3 up next.